Oh, they once told me, darling, what didn't make me will never break me.
How's it going? Welcome to the Perspective Podcast. I'm your co-host Dylan Boland. I'm hosting this podcast with my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Tim Quinlan. The original idea for the podcast stemmed from many conversations myself and Tim have had through the years pertaining to self-development, and we thought maybe someone else could get value from these conversations, and that's where we are now.
Hello all, my name is Tim Quinlan. I am a retired teacher. I'm 64 years of age. Very roughly, I spent 30 years in the classroom teaching Irish religion and mathematics, and in the last 10 years of my teaching life in a unit dedicated to teaching boys with autism. And I spent 10 years in that unit and loved it. And I also, over those numerous years, helped out the school counsellor with psychotherapy. So I have a great interest in psychotherapy. And I love the idea that psychotherapy is about healing people, is about allowing people to become themselves, to become more and more themselves, to appreciate their gifts. In my retirement, I have just completed a PhD, which is in Storying the Self, also under the heading of human development and psychotherapy. So I'm interested in helping young people now, these days, prospective teachers, to get to know themselves and to get to appreciate the children that they are going to teach, the young adults that they're going to teach, and how to present themselves to them and how to connect with those young people and young adolescents, and how to give them a sense of their well-being and that it is worthwhile to be living and alive, and that if they have any problems that they can reach out, and in the name of this podcast, which is Perspective or Lens on Life, that they can connect, one, with themselves, two, with others, and three, I would think, with whatever is that beautiful principle of life. Some people call it God, some people might just call it the power or energy behind life. So that's my introduction. I hope that's of some help.
That was brilliant, Tim.
Joining us as of now, and your older brother has just left the room and suggested that we start our podcast with a beautiful C note. And most meditators, especially Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist meditator, let's start with the note of C. Over to you now, Dylan.
So I originally had it called The Value of Sacrifice, but last week when we spoke, we kind of were talking a lot about success, and while we were talking, I remember you talking about how you defined success in your kind of latter years, and something about that really resonated with me. So I was going to ask you to talk a bit about that. Like, how has your definition of success changed in your life through the years?
Okay, that is, I believe, an excellent question. And I think you put your finger on it there by saying that one's notion of success changes as you get older. When I was younger, I felt that I needed to be someone or something or have some qualification that made me better than others, that gave me power. So therefore, I was a young guy from a working class background, and the only successful people I could see in my locality at that time, which would have been the mid-60s to the early 70s, would have been the teachers who taught me. right? They seemed to have cars. We had no car. They seemed to have things. And so I said, oh, maybe when I become a teacher, and that's what I want to be, that's what I wanted to be, I will achieve success. So I was looking around. Then, of course, I had uncles who were successful, one especially who was a carpenter and then became a construction man, owning his own construction business, who built houses in the country. So he was successful. So I was looking at people who were successful, and I thought it was always people, success then what equaled money, you know.
Yes.
So success was achieving something. So education was the key to that. But as I got older and then I became a teacher, I was still discontent. Now, I wasn't unhappy, I was discontent. So success then, what is it? Okay, I had achieved my degree as a teacher, but I still felt I wasn't as content as I could be. That there was something else missing. There was something else missing. And as I got older, I realized that what was missing was a simple, it's simply stated, but it is a very difficult concept to grasp. And that is being true to yourself, being content with yourself, getting to know what this life was all about, finding some sort of ease in living. That success boils down to having good relationships with yourself and with others. And this became paramount for me. And as I got older and older, while I did extra degrees over the time, they in themselves were if you like, marks of continued success. But really, they were only marks. That the real success lay in my acceptance of myself, in my acceptance of others, and in my good relationships. So you can have everything in the world and have so little. Like Elvis Presley, who died in his early 40s, had the whole world at his feet and yet had nothing, you know. So I think success is something very, very deep.
Yeah. As you were talking there, Tim, I thought about how we last week got to success from sacrifice. And it made me think about how a lot of the people I admire as being successful are people that helped others to make them feel self-acceptance and feel better about themselves. So I would say that the sacrifices that they made to do that are the right ones for the right goals, because a sacrifice is good or bad by its motive, but also by its outcome. I've been listening to a woman called Claire Wineland, who has since died. I told you about her last week.
You did, yes, I remember you telling me.
She was terminally ill her whole life with cystic fibrosis, and I've actually watched a lot of her videos over the last 2 months because I felt like I was in a bit of a dark place, and I got this strange comfort from her videos. They were very what others might think of as being like morbid, because she was talking through the process of her accepting her own death, which was coming, and ultimately did. But there was something so comforting about those videos. But one revelation of hers that relates to this is that she says how we all take it as fact a lot of time that money doesn't equal success. But she said we all value health as being a sort of success in our life. Like if we're not healthy, we can't aspire to live. That's how she put it. And I found that so interesting from her point of view, because this is a woman who can barely, like, she can't get off a defibrillator, I believe it is, a breathing machine. Like, she can't do a whole lot with her life, but yet she did all that she could.
Yes.
She started a charity foundation when she was very young, and that inspired me. And I looked at her as being successful, although she wasn't healthy. And then we all know the story with wealth, but it's just different people's ideas of success. I think it's really interesting how it does differ from person to person.
Yes, I think you've covered an awful lot there, and all very deep stuff. Um, I remember last week when we were talking about how we would approach this particular podcast this week. We decided to change the emphasis from the value of sacrifice, or highlighting sacrifice per se, to the value of success. And I think we need to have some idea or something, some goal, success. Now, it's all about myself and accepting myself. Indeed, it is at the baseline, or if you like, the ultimate goal of success is that I can learn to accept and love myself and to love others. I think that is the big goal of success. Now, when I was young, and I which was interesting, and I think I had a dream about it last night, and it's a bit fuzzy now, the dream, but when I was at 12 years of age, there was a teacher who taught me, and I was always in a B class. And he was such a good teacher that after 2 years with him, I ended up in the A class because I kept coming first place in his class. And he was an old man. He was literally in his mid 60s. He was just coming up to retirement. And I remember saying to myself, I'd love to be like Mr. Murray because of what he's done for me. And I sort of felt I could do that for others, you see. And if I was to really look at my reason for becoming a teacher, I wanted to be another Mr. Murray, and I could see that there was a reason for this, that if I became a teacher, it would be success insofar as I might eventually have a car. I could have the power of there is a certain amount of power in teaching, actually, insofar as you can captivate children with story, actually. I think story is a very big thing if you're talking about teaching. But to concentrate on the success bit of it, you have to, if I wanted to be a teacher, I had to sacrifice something. And what the sacrifice is, you have to study. Okay? And that's difficult. And because you have to stay on your own sometimes, because you can't study with other people a lot of the time. So you have to sacrifice a lot of, you have to make little sacrifices. And then you see, as you get along, get older, you realize, oh, well, if I need that degree, or if I need to become, as I am now, a college teacher, I need to have a degree behind me. Whether it be a PhD or an MA or whatever, so that I can achieve what I want to do. So you do need to make sacrifices. And you have to work out, just like a runner. A runner is going to have to train. A musician is going to have to train. You look when I look around the studio, you're going to have to work at music production, right?
Yeah.
And that's a sacrifice. Like, we could be out in the sun sunning ourselves.
Yeah.
But instead, you've decided, no, I'm going to sacrifice. So I think, so when we say the value of sacrifice, the value is that the goal is success.
Yeah.
And the success may be...
But both are like independent of the person that's undertaking the sacrifice and then attaining the success. It's all dependent on the person. But I think there are markers that people generally agree with. Like, I think a lot of people do, for the most part, say that money doesn't equal success, and that health not equaling success. I think that's another take on it from that girl Claire Wineland. But I think that's very interesting. And Jordan Peterson, who we talk a lot about, is a strange one in that he says that happiness doesn't equal success, and what he means by that, I think, from what he's explained and my interpretation of it, is that fleeting happiness, gratifying pleasures don't equal success, and they don't make us feel good oftentimes. Like, it's only like the true happiness, or like when you feel most at ease or integrated in yourself, I'd say, like from a union kind of analogy, like I think it's when you have that ultimate feeling of contentment from from having undergone a major sacrifice that was self-inflicted, in that you decided to sacrifice your time, your money, your energy, your whatever it is, your physicality on this goal, and in attaining that's a truer sense of accomplishment than just a fleeting satisfaction. So I think that's where Jordan Peterson comes at it. So
Yes, I think that's quite philosophical, and it really goes back to Aristotle, who described happiness as something we do and something we become as an action, rather than this crazy state of being on, say, whatever it is, ultimate happiness, going on the lovely sun holiday, having as many things to satisfy our senses and all that. I know this much. As you were talking there, I was thinking, I remember when I was doing my Masters in Human Development, we had a course on Aristotle and on what he felt happiness was. And there was a statistic given at the time, and I can't remember the precise statistic, but I'll just give it a figure now as I'm talking. And let's say $60,000. There was a group of psychologists and sociologists in the States in the 1980s or 90s, I think. And they came up with this figure, $60,000, through research now, through hard research. They interviewed thousands upon thousands of people, and they found that $60,000 was anyone that earned over $60,000, they were no more happier. But anyone that earned below it were unhappy because they hadn't got the basis to make their lives happy. So in other words, things don't make us happy at all. Yeah. Things don't make us happy.
Cap on how far materials will get you.
Correct.
And what should we say? Like, everyone wants to keep themselves afloat. Like,
yes.
Everyone wants a home, shelter, basic relationships that just keep us sane.
Yes.
And once we attain those simple things in life, then there really is a cap on how much material would get you. Like, I was listening to a podcast that someone put me on to, called The Diary of a CEO.
Yes.
And I was actually thinking about our podcast while I was listening to it, because the guy in the podcast, Steve Bartley, I believe his name is this multi-millionaire CEO of a company. I think it's called Social Chain, but he's from the UK and he's a young guy. But he talks about his process of, actually, it's funny when I think about it. It's very similar to what we're talking about. It's to do with value and success, and how his opinion of those things changed as he attained the wealth that he always wanted. He suddenly could afford. I think it was a Ferrari he wanted.
Yes.
He really wanted that car. But then when he actually had the money for it, he had this moment of evaluating himself as to why he wanted that car. And he ended up not buying it because he realised that it wasn't the car that he wanted. It was the ability to buy the car that he wanted. But I just found that interesting. Like, I don't mean to get philosophical, Tim, I always do, but that's what this episode is somewhere around there, because I believe that sacrifice and success are somewhat intertwined, and I believe that we're hitting on something.
Absolutely.
There, and it's to do with self-development, as this podcast is broadly centred on.
Yes, and I think, okay, I'd like just to do a little bit of devil's advocate here in this sense. And I remember the Irish Nobel poet Yeats, William Butler Yeats, said once about sacrifice. He says, "Too long a sacrifice makes a stone of the heart. Now, that is if I'm sacrificing myself and I don't have an end point in view, and I'm doing this sacrifice and it's breaking me down rather than building me up. And if you take that lady that you mentioned, Weinstein,
Claire
Wineland, she has accepted or had accepted her illness and worked from there and worked to a goal. I'm thinking of loads of people who I see who also have podcasts and stuff, who have lost the use of their legs or arms, and yet can still see the value of sacrifice. So to see the value of sacrifice takes a strong individual. It takes an individual with a deep spirituality. But I think nonetheless, Yeats was right that if there are certain people who literally wallow in their own misery, that's the type of sacrifice that makes the stone of the heart.
That's a bad sacrifice.
That's a bad sacrifice. So I think for the listeners it's important to say that there are bad sacrifices. But what we're talking about here is sacrifices we know have a reason for being there.
Yeah. And I think a good or bad sacrifice is determined by the outcome of it.
Yes.
So wallowing in your self-pity, which, if I'm honest, I've done a lot of that.
And so have I in my time.
Particularly in the last kind of 3 months. I've done a lot of it and I feel like I'm coming out of it. But
Yes.
it was other people that helped me. Again, people I admired, because again, it's people I admire who have sacrificed something to help others, and that's been their way of finding their identity, I think. Like a woman I work with from Gale Autism Services.
Yes.
Helped so much to make college more accommodating for me recently. And you've helped me, Tim, with advice you gave me on college, and you've helped me in secondary school, and I just think that the sacrifices that help other people are good, and it's funny how it's kind of like a feedback loop. Like I in turn want to make sacrifices that are good, that will help others around me too. So I think the world's a really lonely place when people don't have friends around them, or mentors, or a guide to share those values that they hold, or a role model. Like, that's what even made me feel like I could attain success, whatever those parameters were, or that I made them to be. And I'm still figuring out what those metrics are that I feel success in my life is. But I couldn't have went to college without the people who I admired being, if only just an example to me of that I could attain it. And when I say attain it, again, it's a very broad term, but it's implicit, it's intuitive. It's like a feeling. When you see someone that you admire, there's something in how they're acting in the world, or behaving, or treating others, or feel themselves, self-acceptance. There's something in their approach to life that to me, that I just admire. And it doesn't matter what their career choice was or whatever, but I found that they all had in common that they helped other people. And
yeah, I think that is the nub of it, that they helped other people.
yeah.
A philosopher I like, Martin Buber, and he said, we are a people built for relations. We are relational beings. And one of the things I like when I'm teaching at third level now, and I always say to the students, my favourite word is connect. You will be a good teacher if you connect with the pupils.
Yeah.
You will be a good lecturer if you connect with the students. You'll be a good doctor if you connect with your patients. You'll be a good mechanic if you connect with your customers. You'll be a good shopkeeper if you connect with your customers. So I think connecting and relating are, and I think this is success. You see, interesting now as we go along and talk here. I've always felt this. Eric Byrne, a famous psychiatrist, had transactional analysis, and transactional analysis was just to be aware of the way you're communicating at the moment. Basically, you sort of said, well, what's happening here? How am I relating to X? How am I relating to Y? Now, I came in here to this studio. Great studio. Love the studio. Now, I'm talking to Chris as if I have always known him.
Yeah.
Why? Because I can relate to him. Because he's at a level that I'm at and you're at. And we were saying that success is getting to accept yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what we said. Isn't that correct? That's what we said at the beginning of the podcast. So I know, and through you, I knew Chris, you get me?
Yeah.
But I know now, but even the way he shook my hand, I knew that there was a deeper relationship there, you get me?
Yeah.
And this is amazing to me. This is where, if you like, success comes about. That it comes out on a relational level. And I notice now, say, in the last couple of years, my two brothers and I have been doing more together. And we have a great relationship between each other. And so success is down to that. But say now, for instance, each of the three of us were millionaires and didn't give a shite about each other. Oh, excuse me, Dad, you might edit that out.
Not at all. I'll be swearing at some point.
Okay,
during this.
So in other words, we could be millionaires, we could go out onto and have a yacht or whatever, like all these oligarchs in Russia. But what good is it? Because they're not relating to the ordinary people. Yeah. And I do think success is about being comfortable with yourself. Like, for instance, I'd asked the kids to do an essay at college, and they'd say, what is self-concept, right? And I'd say, well, self-concept is no much good if I don't like myself.
Yeah.
And it's self-acceptance that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And this is where we come back to all the people you've mentioned there, whether it's a person who is suffering from that dreadful disease of the chest. What's it called again?
Cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis. And in fact, there was a little girl and a little boy next door to me as a child. Well, not as a child, as a young person. And my mother used to always great time for them. And both of them are now dead because both of them had cystic fibrosis. And they died in their teenage years. Like, even at that stage, now that's about 30 years ago, like the medication wasn't so far advanced. So you're saying that even if my health is against me, I can actually, I don't have to have perfect health. And who has perfect health anyway? So, but I have to work with what I have and make these. So let's make it a distinction. We're making a value of a good sacrifice that I know, okay, I can't do X and Y and Z now, but maybe I can do W. And maybe that will give me a goal and it will be success for me. It might be write a book. It might be write my experience of X.
For me, Tim, if I'm being honest, in the last 3 months, a lot of the feeling I felt, and I spoke to you about this, Tim, was loneliness. And that was one metric of success that I wanted to attain, was having a social life, having friends, having a relationship someday, or being able for those things. But what I found was, first of all, the people who cared about me around me, I was aware that they were there helping me, but I wasn't fully appreciating it because I was so focused on not having those things. We talked about that in the Gratitude podcast.
Yes.
About that kind of blindness that we all have, the willing blindness when we don't look at what we do have. But for me, I was so focused on that being a metric of success. But when I spoke with you, and it became clear to me that self-acceptance was the greater goal to attain for in myself. Because what I did was I felt hurt, that I felt lonely on weekends where people my age in college and elsewhere would be out socialising, and maybe people I knew in relationships would be out planning whatever, going to festivals or doing whatever they were doing, and I was there on my own. And I really evaluated, why am I here on my own? But then instead of asking why I was asking, what am I doing with this? And that's where the self-acceptance thing came in. I was like, am I looking after my physical health? No. Am I looking after my mental health? No.
Right.
Am I looking after my everything? And and I'm still getting back to myself, I would say. I'm still in that process, and things have been easier now with college. There's been a few accommodations made, I was telling you about before the podcast, with sensory difficulties I've had and things. But now what I want to attain is self-acceptance. Not for other people to like me, but for me to like myself enough to then value who it is that likes me, and do I want to be in a relationship with these people, whether it's just cordial or if it's more like friendship, romantic, whatever it is, to have that self-love, to be able to make a decision on my own, on my grounds, if that makes sense, and to have that self-esteem.
Yes,
So
it
now
does make
that's
sense.
the goal I want to attain. I want to look after myself better, and like I'm in college, I want to get my degree, but more than the degree, I want the experiences. But when the experiences are bad, I'll remember the degree.
Yes.
So
I think there's a lot of things that you can be thankful for, and indeed I can be thankful for. For instance, I'm being introduced to this podcast through you, and I actually think this is a marvellous sort of experiment for me, because I have a certain amount of knowledge, and when I die, that certain amount of knowledge just disappears. I'd like to feel that I can share that. I'd like to feel that I have a structure to share whatever, inverted commas, wisdom I've built up. Now, and I'm not being egotistical about that, because whatever wisdom I have, it's been hard won. But doing this podcast, you see, is a great self-affirming thing to do. And itself is a success. The first one has gone very well. I listened to it a few times and I was actually surprised that it was so good. And it did turn out very good because it was just this marvellous project. And I think that is, if you like, to come here, and for you, like, we had to make the sacrifice today, right?
yeah,
You have to set the studio up. I had to, well, of course, I knew it was on today, so I was up at 9 o'clock and I was getting myself into the space for it. And to me, it gave structure to my day, right?
Yeah.
So this whole episode has given structure to my day and has been self-affirming, right? So there's the value of the sacrifice. There's the value of the sacrifice, that I'm not just doing it for nothing, okay?
yeah,
And again, the three things you mentioned there, or two things anyway, you said, what am I doing for my physical health? And you said nothing. For instance, COVID-19 epidemic for me was actually good because it got me walking every day. And I've lost about a stone in weight, okay?
yeah.
And
I've noticed it.
Okay.
Like I've said it to you before.
okay.
You look
So
great.
in other words, right, that's been the big thing. So I've actually before I came here, I rang my brother and I said, I'll be down to you after around 4 and we'll go for a walk. So we'll walk about 5 kilometres. Now, the reason I'm walking 5 kilometres, I know that when I do 5, I will bring down my blood sugars by 2 points, right? Because I have
Yeah.
diabetes number 2. I will also bring down my blood pressure. So your question, am I looking after my mental health? Am I looking after my physical health? I've only begun that since COVID, because before then I was quite tubby, right? My younger brother always called me Michelin Man. That was all right. I accepted that. Now, Was I looking after my mental health? Yes, I was, because mental health was always a thing that I had great interest in psychology. So I was doing a lot of meditation and stuff, but I wasn't looking after my physical health. But since I've been looking after my physical health, I've even felt better mentally, because the two are so related. So those are the two. And was there another question you had? Was I looking after my physical health? Was I looking after my mental health? And what was the third one? Did you say a third one? Maybe you didn't.
I think if there was a third one, it was like, why not?
Why not? Yeah. So again, to go back to what you gave as the possible title of this present podcast was the value of sacrifice. And I said, oh, very narrow in my own mind, too narrow, but I knew exactly what you were on about. And then when I put in the success thing, it actually filled it out.
On sacrifice and success.
You see.
Yeah.
So sacrifice and success makes sense. And if you uncouple the sacrifice from the success, you've nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Yeats meant. Too long a sacrifice makes a stone of the heart, you know. But
I think there's something playing there too in that like there's a conscience we all have, but then there's also the incessant thought, and it's about determining whether it's your conscience or whether it's the incessant thought. And I think that's something that Yeats' poem kind of points out, because the idea of self-acceptance is not to say I'm okay doing the things that I know I shouldn't be doing, but I accept myself anyway. It's about saying I'm following my conscience to the degree that I can, but I'm also not letting my incessant thoughts tell me I'm not good enough. So once you're trying, basically. So to me, even though I was talking about mental health, physical health there, they're not metrics of success either to me. It's that self-acceptance and self-integrity, or building integrity. So it's, for me, that means, and this is where Jordan Peterson was getting at with the happiness not equaling success as well, is that and so what it's getting at to me is, if I'm following my conscience to the best degree that I can, because our conscience tells us all what we should be doing all the time.
Yes.
So if I can follow that to the degree that I know it's helpful, and it's very hard to know when it's not helpful, and I would pose that when it's not helpful, it's not your conscience, rather it's your mind's commentary, that incessant thought, when it's putting your self-esteem down. So if you think to yourself, being physically fitter would make me happier, and once that's a genuine thought posed by your conscience, and in pursuing it you do feel better, then that's good. But if it's a thought of you're not fit enough, you're fat, this, that, the other, that's unhelpful. So I'd say that integrating yourself as best you can with that inner conflict, and then attaining that self-acceptance, that's getting to the root of success. And that means that whoever you are, whatever it is you value, that sense of success will be in your life.
Yeah. And I think
I hope I didn't digress there.
No. I'm picking up what you're on about. I'm just, while you were talking, I was thinking of a real life example of someone who incessantly listens to the ego, which is based on comparisons with others, and as a result saying, I'm too fat, I'm too ugly, I'm not successful. I'm just thinking of that incessant play in the mind. And I was thinking of one gentleman who was our vice principal for years. He's long since dead. But he was a very embittered man. And to his dying day, he held it against the Christian Brothers who ran the school that he hadn't been made principal, right? So for 25 or 30 years, he bore this this horrible resentment and became very embittered about life, and as a result, became a bully, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, he was listening to that incessant thing. Now, the opposite thing, I can give you an example. I remember the principal in our school. This is a good story, so I'll mention his name. Brian O'Dwyer said to me, everyone should run for the post of vice principal. And I wasn't particularly interested, call it deputy principal now. I wasn't particularly interested in being deputy principal. I decided to do it. Anyway, the interview was great and I enjoyed it. Now, I didn't get it, but it didn't destroy me. I didn't become, oh, I'm unsuccessful. I remember when I thought about it, I said, no, that job would have driven me crazy. It would have increased my anxiety. I wouldn't have liked it. And in fact, I ended up doing one of the things I most enjoyed was teaching special ed and working in an autism unit, which I really enjoyed. So for me, I learned an awful lot in the interview about myself.
Yeah.
And it became then a source of success rather than a failure. So I do think we have to analyse how we react to things. But this guy had kept with the idea, and all the time he felt, he became a bully, but he actually had low self-esteem and low self-acceptance. Now that's sad.
Yeah.
And your thing is about, let's break down that mask, let's communicate. And this was for my father, and it's the first person pronoun. And one of the things that struck me was, as I was writing this, I wrote it over a cup of coffee in Costa in Santry. One thing that struck me, well, why should I become obsessed with myself, right? That there's other things I can do. And it's called the first person pronoun for Thomas Quinlan. How dare I even mention the first person pronoun? Never mind complain in this world of dissonant voices that moan on and fill our ears with jarring notes and sparring interpretations. Reality escapes my bemused mind, refuses to be tied down, recalcitrant colt. Once in the distant past, my father stopped me in my tracks. One day you will understand, he said. Understand? No, never. Accept, maybe. Accept that nasty things happen to good people. That the grief of a 12-year-old boy weighed hard. That was my father. A boy who lovingly stroked his dying father's head of black hair. Embittered not by the lot the fates had dealt him at so tender an age, but by the plight of an overworked mother, condemned to scrub and save, and so much more no words can capture. How dare I complain now that I have conjured up your stoic presence, your selfless toil for your children, your perseverance despite the plight meted out by chance and circumstance. I remain in awe of you, Father, for your courage in adversity. I remorsefully withdraw my eye, my me, my, and I am content to accept my lot, even if I will never understand the perverse persistence of the first person pronoun.
That was beautiful, Tim. I almost had a tear in my eye.
Yeah, you see, it's like your lyrics to your song. So what we're saying is, what is success? And we're back to the fact of the value of sacrifice, which allows us success. And the sacrifice is, I have to say, no, I don't want a Ferrari. It's not going to bring me happiness. If I earn anything over whatever the figure is, I'm not going to be any more happy. So let's take it as $60,000, as I said. So if I have $60,000 or $600,000, or if I have $6 million or $6 billion, I'm no more happy.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go. So success cannot. You use a lovely phrase there. What are the metrics? metrics of happiness. That's brilliant, because how do I measure? Because metros is the Greek for measure, like a metronome. How do I measure out success? And we have said, no, it comes in how far I can actually accept myself. So I think that's, so we started with that it is about that self-acceptance. I think that's worth repeating. Say that again, because that is a good point to get across.
It's just as lonely to be around others that don't share your values as it is to be alone.
Absolutely. Because if you're around and either in a family and the other partner does not share your values, that's a hell of a lonely place to be. And in fact, most people want to get out of that as quickly as possible. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wait, it's recording. So
Oh, it's recording.
you can do it.
Okay. So we're going to finish now on this C vibration.
My empire would fall.